Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving deep into the fascinating yet dark history of colonization, how it started, what motivated it, and the far-reaching impacts it had on the world. Whether you're a history buff or just curious about the origins of global power dynamics, this video is for you. So, let's get started and explore the rise of European empires and the beginnings of colonization. Colonization is one of the most impactful events in human history, reshaping economies, societies, and cultures across the world. It refers to the process where a powerful country establishes control over a foreign territory, exploiting its resources, people, and land for economic and strategic advantage. Colonization did not begin with one single event, nor was it a straightforward process. It evolved over centuries, driven by a combination of political, economic, and social factors. The origins of colonization are complex, and understanding how it started requires a deep dive into history, looking at the motivations, key players, and the early stages of colonial expansion. Early beginnings of colonization. Although colonization is most commonly associated with the European powers of the 15th to 20th centuries, the roots of this phenomenon can be traced back much earlier. Ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans practiced forms of colonization. For example, the Phoenicians established trading colonies around the Mediterranean as early as 1200 BCE. The Greeks set up city-states in distant regions, while the Romans expanded their empire by incorporating new territories. These early examples were more about trade, military conquest, and the spread of cultural influence. The desire for resources, trade routes, and military conquest laid the groundwork for later forms of colonization. However, what distinguishes European colonization from earlier examples is the scale, systematic nature, and exploitation of non-European lands and peoples. The era of modern colonization began to take shape in the 15th century, driven by changes in technology, economic structures, and social dynamics. The Age of Exploration. The catalyst for the large-scale colonization of the Americas, Africa, and Asia was the Age of Exploration. This period, which began in the late 15th century, was marked by a desire among European nations to find new trade routes and territories. The development of better navigation tools, such as the compass and the astrolabe, and advancements in shipbuilding made it possible for European explorers to venture further than ever before. Key figures like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan led expeditions that opened up new lands for European exploration and exploitation. Columbus's voyage to the New World in 1492, for instance, was a pivotal moment in the history of colonization. Although Columbus believed he had reached Asia, his discovery of the Caribbean initiated European interest in the Americas, setting the stage for the colonization of the New World. The Portuguese and Spanish empires. Among the first European countries to engage in colonization were Portugal and Spain. In the late 15th century, both nations were seeking new sources of wealth and power, particularly by gaining access to the spice trade and other valuable resources in Asia. Spain's expansion began with the voyages of Christopher Columbus, leading to the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Spain established colonies throughout Central and South America, extracting precious metals like gold and silver and enslaving indigenous populations to work on plantations and in mines. This conquest, often brutal and devastating for the indigenous peoples, was driven by the Spanish crown's desire for wealth, resources, and territory. Meanwhile, Portugal began its own exploration of the world, particularly along the coast of Africa and eventually reaching Asia. Under the leadership of figures like Prince Henry the Navigator, Portugal established trading posts along the African coast and later created a sea route to India. The Portuguese established a colonial empire that spanned from Brazil to parts of Asia and Africa. The expansion of European colonial empires. While Portugal and Spain were the pioneers of European colonization, other European powers soon followed suit. France, England, and the Netherlands were especially active in the 16th and 17th centuries, establishing colonies around the world. England, with its focus on North America, began colonizing the region in the early 1600s. The establishment of the Jamestown colony in Virginia in 1607 marked the beginning of English colonization in the Americas. Over time, England expanded its presence in the New World, founding colonies along the eastern seaboard of what would become the United States and in the Caribbean. France, similarly, began its colonization efforts in the Americas, establishing colonies in Canada, New France, and parts of the Caribbean. The French sought to exploit the fur trade and establish agricultural colonies, but their presence in the Americas was often in competition with the British and Spanish. The Dutch, known for their maritime prowess, established colonies in Asia, the Caribbean, and parts of North America, notably New Amsterdam, which would later become New York. The Atlantic slave trade, a central pillar of colonization. A key aspect of colonization was the transatlantic slave trade, which began in the 16th century and lasted until the 19th century. As European nations established colonies in the Americas, they required labor to work on plantations producing cash crops like sugar, tobacco, and cotton. Initially, indigenous peoples were forced into slavery, but their population quickly dwindled due to disease and mistreatment. To meet the labor demands of their colonies, European powers turned to Africa, forcibly transporting millions of Africans to the Americas. The slave trade became a cornerstone of the colonial economy, enriching European powers while causing immense suffering to the enslaved people and their descendants. The exploitation of resources and indigenous populations. One of the most defining characteristics of colonization was the exploitation of resources and people. European colonial powers sought not only to extract valuable raw materials such as gold, silver, spices, and timber, but also to establish profitable agricultural systems. Sugar, tobacco, coffee, and cotton became important commodities grown in colonies and shipped back to Europe. The exploitation of indigenous populations was central to colonialism. European powers often imposed their control through violence, military conquest, and coercion. Native people were displaced from their lands, subjected to forced labor, and in many cases, decimated by diseases brought by Europeans. In addition to material exploitation, colonial powers also imposed their own social, political, and cultural systems on the colonized peoples. European languages, religions, legal systems, and educational frameworks were forced upon indigenous populations, leading to the erosion of many indigenous cultures. Resistance and the legacy of colonization. While colonization was a process that brought immense wealth to European nations, it also sparked significant resistance from the colonized peoples. In the Americas, Africa, and Asia, indigenous people fought against foreign rule in various forms, from armed revolts to cultural resistance. Some of the most famous revolts include the Haitian Revolution, 1791–1804, where enslaved Africans overthrew French colonial rule, and the Indian Rebellion of 1857, which was a major uprising against British rule in India. Over time, the effects of colonization became harder for European powers to maintain. The American Revolution, 1775–1783, demonstrated that colonized people could successfully fight for independence, and by the 20th century, movements for decolonization gained momentum across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. The aftermath of colonization continues to affect the former colonies, shaping their political, economic, and social structures. Conclusion. The history of colonization is a tale of ambition, exploitation, and resistance. While it began as a search for wealth and territory, it became a force that reshaped the world. The expansion of European empires led to the subjugation and suffering of millions, but also sparked revolutionary changes that eventually led to the decline of colonial powers and the rise of independent nations. Understanding how colonization started is crucial not only for understanding history but also for addressing its long-lasting legacies. The consequences of colonization, economic inequalities, social divisions, and political struggles are still felt today in many parts of the world. Acknowledging the complexity of colonization, its motivations, and its impacts allows us to understand the modern world in a deeper, more meaningful way. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this deep dive into the history of colonization both informative and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more historical content, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. What part of colonization's history interests you the most? Let's discuss. See you next time.